Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack. On today's show, it's a Thursday, which means we dive into our preview of Oregon, number one ranked Oregon Ducks, taking on the visiting Maryland Terrapins. First ever matchup between these two teams. Oregon's like Jared? 25? Is that the line right now? 26-point favorite?
I haven't checked this morning, but yesterday morning it was 24.5, the same as it opened back on Sunday.
Huge numbers, even though that there are injuries, and obviously we know those. Ted Johnson, Marcus Harper, Oregon could be getting back a couple guys, but maybe that's a storyline to touch on here for this one in the preview. Maybe let's just start there. Like, what's our confidence level that the offense will operate at a high level and be able to exceed or meet that 24.5-point spread, even with Tez Johnson and Marcus Harper not playing? I mean, we haven't seen either of them at practice. Dan said he's going to be out for a while. He hasn't really said much about Harper, but I think it's safe to say neither guy will play. But what's our confidence level that this team's going to show up and be able to put up a big number like that without those two guys?
Yeah, I think the expectation should be neither are playing this weekend. I mean, I feel absolutely fine about this weekend's game.
Yeah.
I think if these had happened in the Illinois game leading to Michigan, we'd have a lot of concerns about how a Kavika Rogers or Dave Iuli or Janoris Wilson would stack up against the best interior defensive line. Certainly, that Oregon will play all year. Maryland has some okay players there. That's actually one of their strengths defensively, but I'm not overly concerned that that's going to be something that they're able to exploit to the point where it becomes a problem for Oregon. And I guess I'm curious to see on the offensive line more than receiver. I think we kind of know the solution.
Right.
Maybe Gary Bryant Jr. is involved in it. Maybe he's not. That's maybe the only part we're not sure on. But we expect Justice in the slot, Trayshawn and Evan outside. I think right guard is maybe it's as clear as it's just going to be Kavika because he was the player who replaced Marcus. But maybe it's Iuli. Maybe, I think an outside chance it's Janoris Wilson. But I do wonder. I guess not that I think it's going to be a huge storyline coming out, but when this offensive line was shuffling early on in the season, the offense wasn't very good.
Yep.
Now they're going to have to shuffle somebody in there. I'm not overly concerned, but for me, that is something I'm kind of going in wanting to monitor on offense. That's probably the one thing I'm most interested in is just like, do they stack up okay there? Or do we see and there were some not great moments with Kavika in that game. Now,
Sure.
The competition level, very different than this week. And my guess, I just wonder, like, is the execution going to be there? Are we going to see some of those pre-snap issues? Will there be plays where they're getting blown off the ball? Like that's stuff that I'm kind of aware of, but I can't say it's like code red. I'm really concerned. It's 10 out of 10 on the scale of concern. It's more of kind of like they're going to be fine in this game. I'm not overly worried, but I will be kind of glued to see just what the performance level looks like at right guard. So I think that one more than receiver has my attention because at least at receiver, Justice has already been in this position. The outside guys have been starters before. I was looking at it. Kavika's career snap count is at about 155. And as we talked about on Wednesday's show, Iuli's is like 175 and Janoris, I think, is less than 50. So these are not guys who have playing experience that will be replacing Marcus.
Yeah, I'm not overly concerned about either position groups for wide receiver or offensive line, but of the two, I'm more interested in seeing what the offensive line looks like. Mostly because if that doesn't look good, then it doesn't matter who's playing slot receiver for Oregon on Saturday because Dylan Gabriel's not going to get them the ball. And so I feel good if it's Kavika. I feel good if it's Dave Iuli as well. Even with Janoris Wilson, I feel fine with. I think it's a different situation than it was the beginning of the season where where Matthew Bedford goes down and you think that it's going to be this rotation and now suddenly Charlie Pickard is here and then Poncho is at right guard. Like they have 4 of the 5 solidified, especially with Poncho being at center now. And I just think that'll be okay. And it's going to be easier to transition in a guard rather than a center for Oregon's offensive line. And I think Kavika's a guy who was probably in the competition the first time around in terms of who was going to start at left guard or right guard when Oregon was in that bye week after Oregon State and Nishad Strother was just coming on and getting that chance to be the starting left guard for Oregon's offensive line. So I think that, and then Dylan Gabriel talked about this too on, I think, Saturday after the game, where He said that you can name an offensive line unit, a wide receiving unit, a group of people on the field at the same time, and he's probably played with them. And whether or not, like, I wholeheartedly believe that because he's the quarterback number one, but I believe it to a point where this is what Dan does. We talked all fall camp about two-spot and how important that was for developments. And so part of the benefit of having all those people on the field is getting to line up and, I guess, grow some chemistry with guys that, you probably wouldn't see normally. Like Dylan Gabriel and Jurion Dickey probably have some type of chemistry. And Eric and I were talking about this on Wednesday with, Gary Bryant. It's like, hey, if that guy's going to play, what's his chemistry level going to look like with Dylan Gabriel after not doing anything for the last couple months, or seemingly not doing anything on the practice field for the last couple months? So we'll see, but the offensive line is something I'm more concerned about. But I would say overall, I'm not that concerned with it. I still feel like Oregon's offense should operate and will operate at a high level come Saturday.
I think there's a good chance that we're going to see, maybe it's score dependent or a requirement, but multiple guys at the position group for the offensive line at least. And maybe even receiver. And I think that's, for me, kind of like not necessarily what player exactly is the guy that replaces him, but just kind of how collectively do they look? Is there going to be like a step back? Like, is it going to be they're going to give up an early sack, on Dylan Gabriel, or maybe more likely, will there be more pressures on Gabriel than we've normally seen? What kind of formations do they come out with from a personnel standpoint at receiver? Like, does this injury to Tez mean we see more Kenyon Sadiq, or does that open the door for a Jurion Dickey, or does that open the door for like a burning of a redshirt of Jeremiah McClellan? Like, there's going to be some guys that could play in this game, and I think it's more so of a combination and how do they collectively look than does one guy just step in and take the entire role. I don't think that's going to happen, at least at Tez's spot. Maybe more likely along the offensive line, but I would think if the score goes the way that Vegas sportsbooks think it would, that Oregon should probably try and see how does Kavika handle playing right guard, and then left guard, and then how does someone like maybe a Janoris Wilson or maybe a Dave Iuli handle the responsibilities as well? Like, see what they can do if they're going to be available. Dave Iuli is the one that I think is the wild card. Is he dressed for the first time at Michigan, was off the list, but didn't play, and now he's had a week where it's clear Harper's not playing. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I don't know with certainty if Iuli is like 100%, because it's one thing to be off the availability report. It's another thing to be 100 back to where you want to be. Like, for instance, like Jordan Birch just told us he's now 100%, but he maybe wasn't for that Michigan game, and he wasn't on the availability report, right? So that's just like a recent example of somebody who's not listed there, but probably isn't playing, firing on all cylinders health-wise. One thing on the receivers before we maybe jump into some Maryland-specific stuff, I will be curious how they operate with the redshirt totals here. Pelham's at 4, McClellan's at 3, Gresham has at 0. Ressler's not available, but he also is at 0. Does that get involved with the math of how they want to operate rotationally? You know what I mean? Because we know the 3 guys that we've already mentioned it. Everybody knows those players are 100% going to be involved. I think Gary is the biggest wild card on this team this week in terms of, like, is this guy going to play or not? And if he plays, like, he could play 30 offensive snaps and be their punt returner. Like, none of that would totally surprise me, but I don't know. And if he's not available, if they do choose to sub, it's going to have to be either Dickey, who doesn't have to worry about the redshirt year, or one of those other 2 guys where you are going to be considering the redshirt math here. And why that's important is because we're not very far from the end of the regular season here, and you could get a situation where Pelham and McClellan are able to maintain their years and then play during postseason play. I would imagine that would be the plan and the hope, but maybe you get in a spot where you're in a pinch and you really have to play one of them and they go over that number. I will be curious to see, especially with Pelham being at 4, like, do we see him at all this weekend?
Right.
Do they say, hey, we're in a weird spot. We need to get somebody out there. He's next up in line. Let's get him out there. Or do they try to monitor that and maybe not play anybody besides Jurion because the redshirt doesn't necessarily come into play there. So that's one other thing just to keep in the back of your head going into this one is that the redshirt math of those freshmen.
And I think we'll know early with those wide receivers and especially because we don't know if Gary Bryant is playing. If Gary does play, then maybe you see a freshman or two, but I'd like to think not. I'd like to, what you were saying, Eric, where Oregon's keeping track of obviously the redshirt status of all their players, and they'd want the extra year of eligibility for both those guys, or all three of them, all four of them, but rest or whatever. But you would want the extra year, and you're not going to play them with the postseason in just a handful of weeks, and only two more after this week, only two more games of the regular season. So we'll see if Gary Bryant plays, and I think if he doesn't, it'll be pretty clear that they're going to have one of the freshmen come in and probably burn his red shirt. Although it is interesting that McClellan only has 3 games, because they could use him this week, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And then they'd have another decision to make. But that kind of gives you like a get out of jail free card, where if they do need to get somebody off the bench and, like if there's another injury or whatever, like he seems to be the top dog in terms of the true freshman class, at least in terms of his production and like where he stands on the hierarchy. We'll see though, but at least that gives Oregon another option this week, and then you have to run into that same decision against Wisconsin, which who knows? Like Tez Johnson won't be back by then, and so then it'll just be the same decision you have to make this week. But at least Oregon has the opportunity to play McClellan this week with only 3 games played.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that Tez won't play the regular season, meaning this weekend at Wisconsin, next week, and then in 3 or 4 weeks now against Washington. And quite frankly, like against all 3 of those teams, you should be able to beat them without Tez. So it's get him healthy for the stretch run in the playoffs and the postseason. But Jared's right. Like McClellan I think it's very evidently clear that he's the number 1 guy of all the freshmen in the group. And if I was to probably have to pick who plays and burns a red shirt, it's probably going to be him. But this kind of goes back to our idea of, is Gary healthy? Because if Gary's healthy, I think there's really no need to play anybody. And if our guy Jerion Dickey, or I shouldn't say our guy, but the fan base's guy Jerion Dickey,
he can be our guy too, Matt. Why can't let him be our guy? He's
okay.
Ours.
Like this is kind of like rubber meets the road almost. Like if you can't get in now, like the fan base needs to start wondering, like, okay, this is why he's not playing. It becomes clear he's just not ready yet. And if the deck is stacked for him to play this week, and we'll see if it happens. All right, let's go turn the table now to Maryland. I'll be honest, guys, like this, it's a team that they have 2 really good receivers. They've got a competent quarterback that can put up the ball. Mm-hmm. But their defense isn't very good. Their offensive line isn't very good. Their run game is okay. Their run defense is okay. Their secondary creates turnovers, but I think that's also due to some teams just being aggressive against them. I don't know. Like this game just feels very and it's one that on Wednesday, Dan came out and was like, hey, like we need to pay attention to the details. I don't know if that was him kind of like hammering home, let's get ready to go, or if this team's truly like maybe kind of overlooking a ho-hum type opponent.
I'm going to guess they're not fully overlooking, but that was maybe a bad practice or something. That was interesting because he's so frequently comes up there on a Wednesday and is like, all right, great work today. We did such and such. He was kind of like, we need to focus on the details. That did stand out to me, Matt. Yeah, I mean, it's really hard, finding areas where I go, Maryland really scares me. I mean, the one area that they are pretty proficient and have had success is their pass game. But as we talked about yesterday, I was just looking at it before we got on here. PFF ranks Maryland's pass offense as the 25th best in the country, but they have Oregon's coverage grade as the number 2 in the country. So that kind of mitigates that. And then the other part, which Jared kind of alluded to yesterday, I thought it was a good point, is Maryland can't really protect the passer. They're 128th on the PFF pass block grade. Oregon is 29th in pass rush grade. And that 29th feels even a little low to me based upon some of the production we've seen. And especially now that they have both Birch and Uyunglele out there. This could be a game where you see those guys tee off a little bit. So it's hard for me to find an area where I go, gosh, Michigan really scares me, because even the area where I think they are most probably scary to most opponents, like that's an area I think that's a real strength of this team. I think Oregon on pass downs has been excellent this year. And I think, to be clear, like, and fair, like some of that is the caliber of quarterback they've played. It's not very good. The caliber of receiving talent they've played, it's not been very good. And this will be a step up, certainly from the last week and from most games in Big Ten play and every game in non-conference play. But at the same time, I'm not sure that they have the dogs to really, really cause problems here where this gets scary. And I think that's clearly illustrated by the fact that this is a 3-score line, and the fact that, let's be real, these guys are one rally against USC away from being, without a win in Big Ten play, and having come in with 5 straight losses, with 3 of them having been real ugly. So it's hard to find an area that you go like, oh, this is a scary matchup. And it's interesting because usually we find a couple of those. This week, I kind of agree with Matt. I don't really see something that really like pops out that I go, I don't know how they're going to handle it. So maybe we're over looking some things, but that's kind of where I'm at right now too.
There's some top end talent for Maryland. I think the receivers are really good, and Felton and Prather, I think it is Prather.
Yeah, Prather.
And I really like Billy Edwards Jr. as a quarterback. Yeah. I think he's fun to watch. I think he can throw a good ball. I think he can get out and run too, which I think has kind of been a theme for Oregon recently, and just facing running quarterbacks and trying to keep them contained in the pocket. It's just there's going to be a lot of advantages for Oregon moving into this game, and Erik touched on most of them. And for me, I'm going to be watching the offensive and defensive lines and seeing who's getting the pushback. And if we're going to have Birch back, that certainly helps. But honestly, I think without Birch, I think that Oregon would have had a good chance of getting in some pressures here against Edwards. I talked about this on Wednesday's podcast, but Maryland's right and left tackle have combined for 37 pressures allowed this year, 20 from their left tackle and 17 from their right tackle. Not great. And again, like getting Jordan Birch back and having him rush off the edge is going to be chaotic for these Maryland offensive linemen. And I don't think not a lot of teams have done this, but certainly Maryland hasn't played against a defensive line that is as good as Oregon's this year. So that's going to be a big story. And it's kind of the same idea as I talked about earlier with Kavika Rogers and the offensive line. It's like, it's not going to matter who's playing slot, because Dylan Gabriel needs to throw the ball. Like Billy Edwards could have excellent receivers, and he does on the outside. Is he going to have time to throw the ball where they can go make a catch and go for 15 to 25 yards rather than the 3 to 4 yards of the line of scrimmage play or screen passes that Oregon has done very well this year of sniffing out and tackling a guy at either the line of scrimmage or behind the line of scrimmage. And it'll come down to a lot of 3rd and longs where Oregon's been excellent this year. One of the best teams in the country at handling opponents on 3rd downs, and specifically 3rd down and long. So, I mean, there's some talent here for Maryland on offense. Defense, there's just not a lot. And that's okay, because Maryland tries hard, and they're going to come out with their hair on fire, because that's kind of what Mike Locksley teams have done in years past. They've always played the Ohio States tough. They've always played the Michigan's tough. They've always played the Penn State's tough. Like, they come out and play teams hard when it's either at home or on the road. They like to give a problem. There's just going to be a lot of factors that go into this game that they're not going to be able to control, like the 6-hour flight to Eugene on whatever. They might be leaving on Thursday to get here on Friday to get used to the time change. Like the weather. If it's raining and it's downpour raining, I could tell you that a team who throws the ball 42 times a game is not going to like that. And a team like Oregon, who has the rush defense and the pass rush to get after the quarterback in the rain, they're going to be pretty happy about that. So I think there's something that Maryland can't control, which might have something to do with the game. But for the most part, Oregon's talent is just going to be too much at positions of weakness for Maryland to really, honestly, really, in my brain, really make this a competitive matchup.
I agree. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll dive into our predictions for this game. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast, game preview edition. I think I'll go first here. Over, under, these are team prop bets. Over, under, Oregon's season high in points scored of 49.5. I went back and looked. Oregon's high is 49 against Oregon State. Maryland's season high allowed is 48 on the road at Minnesota. I think Oregon's offense is significantly better than Minnesota's offense, but I don't know why, but I'm taking the under here. Oregon just doesn't feel like the team this season that, like, whether they're trying to or whether they just quite honestly just don't care of throwing up massive numbers. It's just find victories and then preserve the health and get out of town. So I'm saying that you will score under 49.5 points in this game.
Matt, you buried the lead. You moved into first place in our standings this year.
I did, yeah. It was. Jared and I both had the same score. I think we went 7-3. It helped that you were in first and you went 4-6.
I had a bad week.
Happens to the best of us.
It does, and I am the best of us, I guess.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Yeah, Matt is now.
You're only one game above me.
Yeah, we're tight.
Easy
We are bunched together now. Okay. Yeah, I also went under. Won't keep this too long. It's just that number. They've been scoring in the 30s in Big Ten play against everybody, and that includes teams that are pretty similar caliber to this team. I agree with Matt. I think they get to a certain total probably midway through the third quarter, and we don't see a whole lot after that. So I don't think they're going to get over 49.5.
Yeah, I went under as well. There's no doubt in my mind that Oregon has the offensive talent to do it, to put up like a 50 burger. But like I said, I just don't think there's going to be as much scoring this game as some might believe, or like at least the Vegas line, because of the rain. I genuinely think it's going to impact the game pretty significantly for both teams. So, but I still think that Oregon could put up a lot of points. I just don't see 50.
Over under 7.5 points scored by Oregon in the third quarter. We all know about the struggles here. I felt like maybe 6, but then that felt like really easy. So I said, let's just see more than a touchdown. I think it's going to happen. In part because of what Jared just said. I don't, to a degree, I don't think this game's going to have the explosive drives that Oregon has had in the past in some of these blowouts, most notably like against Michigan or Illinois, or even I guess Purdue, where they just like go 4 or 5 straight drives down the field and score touchdowns, and it be in 2, 3, 4 minute sequences. I think they could still score 4 straight times. I just think it's going to be very methodical. We might see a lot of like 9, 10, 11, 12 plus drives by Oregon that chew up a bunch of time, which just naturally bleeds into the third quarter of your starters being in the game. So I'm taking the over of 7.5.
I'm taking the over too, mostly because when there have been things this team has chosen to work on, they've gotten better there this year. And while Dan has totally minimized this, he's also said a couple times that's something we need to work on, right, in terms of the third quarter struggle. So I do think it's an area that they will be motivated to show an improvement from, because it's a weird thing. And frankly, I hope they do, in part because I'm hoping we don't have to talk about this anymore. Every week there's a mailbag question about what's wrong in the third quarters, even though they're winning these games by 2 or 3 scores, 4 scores sometimes. So I took the over here, maybe more than anything, just to hopefully shut up the discourse on this third quarter stuff.
That'd be nice. I went under. I think they'll score a touchdown, and that's it.
Fair enough. Over under 1.5 total turnovers in this game. So this is collectively these two teams. Maryland operates almost with like an interception and a half, or a turnover defensively and a half per game. It basically boils down to, do you think Oregon's defense either forces 1 or 2, or is it 1 and 1? I said over, but to give my explanation, I don't think Oregon's going to turn the ball over. I think Maryland will turn it over twice.
Weather is the thing that, and again, we'll see. Sometimes the weather forecast is one thing on a Thursday and it changes by Saturday. Maybe it'll be just dry as it could be, but if it's wet out there, I agree with some of the logic Jared had earlier on what that might do to Maryland's offense and their inability to protect the football. So I think 2 is very much in play here, especially if it's kind of a nasty weather day.
I went over here as well. Maryland's had some trouble with the football recently. They've
Sure
had
have, yeah.
8 turnovers in their last 3 games against Northwestern, Southern California, and Minnesota. I don't know which one of those teams are vaunted defenses to you guys, but there's a good chance that Maryland is going to turn the ball over this upcoming game against Oregon. And you never know. Sorry, microphone. You never know. There's a potential for Dylan Gabriel and Oregon to be up by a boatload in the third quarter specifically and get everybody mad and throw an interception. So I'm going to go over here.
That would be Jared. Don't even put that out there. That's what's going to happen now.
I'm putting it out there.
It's going to ruin both of those props because of a third quarter interception.
Offensive individual prop bets. Eric, lead the way here.
Yeah, I thought this one was kind of fun to talk about because it gets into some of the receiver rotation. So it was over under 3.5 receivers, and I said wide receivers, so it's not including tight ends, catch a pass. I chose over. I think obviously we think Stewart, Holden, and Lowe are going to catch passes, and I do think there will be, whether it's a Gary Bryant return or it's one of the freshmen, somebody else will catch one in maybe mop-up duty. So I took the over.
I went over here as well. I just think there's going to be some dudes in the game. And again, this could be a game where in the fourth quarter, Oregon could have quite the lead and then put in some backups, which will also be interesting to watch. And then there's an even higher chance that this number grows, maybe to 5 or 6. So I went over here, and I think it'll be pretty easy.
Yeah, I have the same logic as Jared. I think that this game will be over by the 4th, which opens the door for whether it's a Gary Bryant breakout for Russ type game or McClellan continuing to play or Dickey. I just think the situation will present itself where the backups get into the game quite early, and that will give the opportunity for a catch.
All right. Does a tight end score a touchdown, which doesn't feel interesting until you realize they haven't all year? So I said yes, just to pick one side. And it would be just fun to see Ferguson get in the end zone, in part because I don't know if people are paying attention to the career lists. He is very close to making a move, and the fact that he hasn't caught a touchdown pass is slowing his progression to passing Ed Dixon for top on that list. So I'm hoping if somebody does get in, it's also Ferguson.
I went no. I was the last person to fill in my picks. You guys both said yes. I'm trying to make up some ground here, and I went no. So we'll find out.
We need to like silent auction this here.
I said yes, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's not T. Ferg. Wouldn't be surprised if it's like a random Pat Herbert or maybe more likely the Kenyon Sadiq screen breaks it loose for a touchdown.
Maybe Roger Saliapaga gets in there.
That would be pretty deep.
Maybe Zach Grace out of the I form catches a pass.
Oh, is he a tight end or is he a fullback? I mean, he's listed as a tight end, but he plays more.
He's a tight end to me.
I think he's a tight end to me, just like if Kenyon Sadiq was spread out in the slot, we would say it was a tight end touchdown, right? So, but I'm just throwing. I mean, we know those things probably aren't going to happen.
What do we do if Josh Connolly catches a touchdown pass, or like Amari Washington who lines up in the jumbo package?
I think those are. I think we're going to designate the player based upon the listed position. So those aren't tight ends to me. Yeah. Okay. Last one on offense. Over under 55 yards receiving for Evan Stewart, which is, by the way, the reason I picked the number. This is his average, but it's an average that includes like 3 massive games where he's either just under 100 yards or over 100 yards, and then 6 games where he's like between 10 and 25 yards. So he has been all over the map this year in terms of production. Last week I thought was going to be the week. It was a Trayshawn Holden week. But I went under this week. I could see it being either way, and I'll probably look really silly on Saturday because this will probably be one of those boom weeks for Evan.
Yeah, I went over for East Stu. Just probably going to be more opportunities with Tez not in the lineup and some uncertainty around who's going to be slotting in out of the slot receiver. And we mentioned like the chemistry factor with Gary Bryant Jr. Trayshawn Holden, Evan Stewart, those guys already have locked in chemistry with Dylan Gabriel. So I'm going to take the over, even though I've been saying all day it's going to rain and there's probably not going to be a lot of passing yards. I'm going to take the over for Evan.
I'm going to take the over, and he might have that in one catch. I don't know. I just feel like it feels like a game where Evan Stewart goes over the top early. So I'm taking the over.
By the way, you're totally right. It could be like the third play of the game. This one's already down.
Yeah, it could be 62 yards for a score, and it's over.
Yep.
Defense, prop bets. Just going to start it off easy. Over under 1.0 Mateo Uyunglele sacks. I went over here. I just think there's going to be lots of opportunities for him, and maybe the offensive line kind of keys in on Jordan Birch, and that's the fun part of this defensive line for Oregon. You can key in on whoever you want, but someone can get home. So I think it'll be Mateo. I've got him, just give me 1.5. That's all I asked for.
Yeah, I'm also going over. He has been very productive this year, and I do think like the Jordan Birch return is just going to create a lot of havoc in the pocket. Like I'm actually pretty excited. We talked about the offensive line being something to watch on offense. On defense, I'm just excited to see these guys all working together and now kind of at full strength again. We haven't seen that in over a month, and Mateo really, I think, kind of elevated this play during that time as well. So I also went over. I think we're going to see Oregon in the backfield an awful lot on pass plays.
I'm going under. I don't know. I feel like Maryland's game plan will be, to a degree, like what Washington State does, of just get the ball out quick. Not the same offense, but just eliminate the opportunity for a sack. So get the ball out quick. The RPO stuff could maybe lead to some sack counts there, but you guys will be right. Mateo will get one if they consistently drop back and try to take deep shot after deep shot. They won't be able to hold them long enough. But I'm just taking the under because I just think, just like Oregon did last week against Michigan, like they're going to kind of play away from the defensive line and the pressures that they can create, which will limit the opportunities.
All right, next up, over under 0.5 of an interception for Jabbar Muhammad. So basically, do you think Jabbar Muhammad is going to get an interception on Saturday? I went over, so I think he will get an interception. Again, this is a Maryland team who loves to throw the ball 42 times. There's just going to be a lot of opportunities. And I don't know if it'll be – I thought about doing Tysheem Johnson for this prop bet, but, might as well just do Jabbar. I mean, he had a lot of fun this week during his media interview. He's going to have a lot of opportunities to get a ball thrown his way. Maryland's ADOT is like 8.9 yards, so they like to throw the ball a little bit farther down the field than most. That's just going to give some opportunities and, rain, maybe some tip drill stuff going on.
Yeah, I went under, but the case for it being over to me is kind of simple. Is we know Edwards just loves to throw the ball at Felton, and I think Jabbar is probably matched up there quite a bit, or at least in coverage in that area a lot. So I took the under just because it's, I don't know, does he catch one? Does he not? He hasn't much. Does he have one this season? I don't think he does, right? Mm-hmm. But it wouldn't surprise me at all because I do think, if you watch Maryland this year, like Edwards will lock in on Felton and throw the ball there 10, 15 times per game. Maybe he forces it into a bad spot and Jabbar is in position to pick it. It wouldn't be super surprising, but I took the under.
I just have a hard time picking a very specific player to make an interception.
Sure.
Like if you told me Jabbar Muhammad had an interception in this game, I wouldn't be surprised. But to guarantee it, I'm not going to go and do that. So I'm going to take the under. I think even though that Felton will be probably matched up with Jabbar, I just don't think they're going to be able to throw to him very often. He'll be his first look, but I don't think it'll be open very often.
All right, last prop bet of the day, over under 6.5 defensive tackles for loss for the Ducks. I went over here. I just think like that's kind of the number that they're going to get no matter what, and then it can really just basically only go up from there. So I'm going to go over here just for 7 tackles for loss.
Yeah, I also went over. If you look at the splits this year, it's like 5 over, 4 under. Like this is right on par in terms of kind of the number they hit. It's basically either been like 7 or 5 or 4 beneath that basically every week. So I took the over. I do think, the case against it would be is Maryland probably doesn't run the ball very much, and are you expecting like a 4 or a 5 sack game? That maybe is a little bit. And that's probably why Matt did something different than us this one. But I also took the over on this.
I said under. I just like I said, I don't think Oregon's going to get 4 or 5 sacks in this game. They're not going to run the ball a lot. Now, they could, if they try and like do the quick screen game thing, that could open the door for tackles for loss. Michigan tried to do it and it failed miserably. But they try and throw the ball a little bit deeper than your typical screen game. So, but I just don't think it happened. So I picked under. All right, score predictions. 24.5 is the spread. I am going to be 1 point under the 49.5 over under. I'm picking Oregon 49, Maryland 14. Big number. They're going to equal their season high, but I think the difference in this game, much like it was up at Oregon State back in middle of September, as far back as that seems, is this going to be very like methodical. Like Oregon's just going to they're going to have 2 drives in the first quarter and score both. And then they're going to have 2 drives in the second quarter and score touchdowns on both. And they're just going to chew up a bunch of clock. They're going to get 7-6 yards every single play. They'll have their deep shots here and there and their big explosion plays. But I just think this is going to be a game where we walk away being like, yeah, they dominated, but like, were there any like crazy, awesome explosion plays? Like, I can't really recall any. Like, it's going to be one of those types of games where you can't really pinpoint one area that they were just unbelievably good in, but they still dominated the game and slowly just slow death for Maryland. So 49-14.
Yeah, I've got 42-16. I think it's going to be a fast death in terms of it'll be over by halftime again. I don't disagree necessarily in terms of how Oregon gets there offensively, though. I just think we've seen the trend now in Big Ten play, with the exception of the Ohio State game, they're just going to get up 2 or 3 scores every first half and put this one on ice. And I think we see that again. I do think you give credit to Maryland's offense. They'll have some success. I don't think this is a game where it'll be, like Illinois or Purdue, where the shutout was, obviously in play against Purdue, and Illinois, that was a game where it was, again, incredible defensive performance early. I think maybe we see Maryland score a touchdown in the first half, maybe have a couple field goals, but I think ultimately, I just don't see them holding up. I mean, for them to be really competitive in this game, Oregon's going to have to be really kind of, tripping all over itself, makes a ton of mistakes. The offensive line stuff doesn't come together at all, and we see a bunch of problems there that are surprising, and the defense really struggles and gets beat on some explosive plays. Like that's what would have to happen for this to be, a very close game, and I just don't see it. So I like Oregon to win it, to cover.
Yeah, I've got Oregon winning 38-17. A little lower scoring than you guys, but still, I feel the same way about it. Like Erik said, like I think this game could be potentially just over at halftime, like it has been for the last couple of weeks for Oregon games. It kind of reminds me of Illinois going into it, but I think Illinois was a much better team just in general. Like I think the wide receiver talents are similar. I think the quarterback talents are pretty similar as well, but Illinois' defense I thought was better on paper and on the field than Maryland's has been and will be. So there's a chance that Oregon, like limits Maryland to like 3 points at half and maybe like 10 points overall in the game. I always kind of give the benefit of the doubt with these predictions that Maryland will probably score. They've got some talent. I like the quarterback. I like the receivers. There is a chance that Oregon just absolutely decimates this team and the game is really over by halftime. And then there's no real chance of Maryland making a comeback in the second half, regardless of how they do in the third quarter or anything. Like the game's just over. Hopefully it's a little bit more competitive. I'd like that. It'd be fun to watch some good football, but I went a deficit of 21 points here or a difference, and that could be 25 in the back of my brain. There's like a monkey, like the Homer Simpson, like clapping the tambourine. It's like 45. It could be that big. So we'll see on Saturday, but I will say like Mike Loxley does like to prepares his team well for big opportunities. And this is certainly that, to say the least, but I don't think there's a lot of chance for the Terrapins, unfortunately.
Bonus question that doesn't count towards the standings here.
Okay.
Does Dante Moore attempt a pass in this game?
I think if they
how many games is he at, Erik?
3.
He's at 3. So I was going to say, I think if they get a spot, I mean, he's got some wiggle room. One of these next 3 games, if there's an opportunity,
it's
he'll
his
get
time.
in.
Austin's gone the last 2 games. It's time for Dante to go.
Yeah, and my thought would also be if you're, and I know that they won't say this publicly, but this is, of the 3 remaining games, the game where the likelihood of getting a backup quarterback in is the highest. I mean, I think there's a chance in the other games as well, but this is the worst team they're playing, I think, by a pretty considerable margin. Like, I don't know what the spread would be against Maryland and Wisconsin or Maryland and Washington, but I bet it would be 2 scores probably. So I think this does make sense. I have another bonus.
Okay.
Who is the punt returner?
I think it's Evan Stewart. I think he just puts his hand up and catches the football every time.
If Gary Bryant plays, it'll be Gary Bryant. If he doesn't play, it'll be Evan Stewart. And I agree with Jared. He'll just put his hand up, and I'm not running. I'm just catching the ball, so don't hit me.
That's a lot of restraint for Evan, by the way. I could also see him just catching one in traffic and doing something crazy, which would be maybe highly entertaining. But that would also be my pick, just because of the uncertainty with what's going on with Gary.
Would we be surprised at all if Ryan Pelham is out there at any point in the game?
I would probably be, just because of the red shirt stuff. Although I don't know. I mean,
that's true. He's not 4 games. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. I mean, it really depends on where they're at with that calculus. If they're like, if Ryan's like, yeah, I just want to play, then maybe. But I also think like you try to be careful with the red shirt stuff.
100%.
You'd hate to get him over 5 kind of needlessly. So
yeah.
All right, it's going to do it for us for the Autzen Audibles podcast. Until the next time you hear all 3 of us on the show, it will be Saturday night, maybe Sunday morning, hopefully Saturday night for this game. Breaking it down, we'll have full coverage leading up to it, during, and after on duckterritory.com. But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.